Hi, this is Lisa and welcome to my channel. Today I am going to do something a little different. Instead of doing a tutorial, I want to have a look at this artist's rendition of an armored Comanche. Before making this, I've done a lot of research on this piece, and I will provide all my links below in the comments if you want to have a look and do your own research on this. And although I've done research, this piece does not actually exist. There is no physical proof of how this was actually put together. So if you have any ideas of what it should look like, if you have any comments, I would love to hear your comments below and maybe have a little discussion on what this might actually look like. So what this is to depict is a Comanche warrior heading into battle. This would not be worn on a regular basis. It would just be going into battle. First, let's take a look at the actual rock art that we're looking at. And this was found in the US. All the information, I'm not going to go through the actual history as I don't do well at talking to that, but I have included all the links so you can look further into this. But here would be something they consider the rock art, and they've done a lot of tracings off that. And if we just look below here, here is some of the tracings. And we can see in some of these that there are armored horses. Here are some excellent tracings of some of the armored horses that are found in the Northern Plains rock art. And you can see here the armor, different ways of looking at it. And they have the armor with just a little toe sticking out of the horses. But I've taken that into account. But you can see all the different ways that these are armored. The horns, the shields, the lances. And this is basically some of the artwork that I am using for my inspiration for this piece. The other place that this was shown up is the Sigasser hides. And here's the dates in the around the early 1700s, late 1600s. And if you choose the tour of these hides, you can see here we have an armored horse. Here's the neck piece. This one is not wearing a mask, but some of them do. The armor has also been documented in several writings, in some histories, but the exact details are not known. There are some little points, and we'll point these out as we go piece by piece. So let's look at this piece of armor and set up piece by piece. The other thing I'd like to point out is we either have the horses coming from Mexico, and we have the guns coming from the east. So this armor would be before the guns and the horses met, because as soon as we had guns, this armor wouldn't have helped at all. So let's go through and break down it piece by piece. First off, let's take a look at the mask. It would most likely be made of buffalo pelts. There would probably be horns on it. The white around the eyes gives the horse better vision. There's probably feathers, but this would be optional, as a lot of times the horse would not be able to see as well with it on. What I would guess is they would use this as a scare tactic going in, but and probably only be worn by some of the top fighters. For the mask, you can see the tradition of mask making for the horses is more than 5 centuries old. So it is very possible that the mask would be worn by an armored Comanche. And here they're also believed they could add power to the warrior. They could scare the people as well. There's a lot of reasons to go into battle with the mask. However, you have to take into account that this also affected the vision of the horse. So you wouldn't want to be moving at high speeds using a mask. Here is another good picture of the horse mask. You can see it's got the buffalo with the horns. This one isn't a barded horse, but it does show you how the mask might look. With the barding, I would assume it would not go down further than the neck. And here's another one with the barding up here. You don't see the face, so you can't tell if it has a mask or not. Here, this one, it looks like it may have a mask on. For this piece, for the bridle, I have created a war bridle, and here it has a scalp lock painted red with some feathers. And there's the single rein, and let's go have a look how that's made. Regular bridles were used, and here you can see from the 1500s that they had proper metal bits, they had regular bridles, but often Comanches did use war bridles, and war bridles are still used today for riding. Here is an interesting image of how the war bridle goes over the horse's jaw. and then right directly to the reins. And we can see here it's just a single rope. There's a way of tying it through the mouth so it doesn't pull too hard or doesn't hurt the horse. They've got to a point where they get it just to the right amount, and it's just a rope tied here. And that's how I've depicted it in mine. And if we look back at the drawings, you can see here things are often hung off the horse's bridle. Oftentimes a scalp piece was hung off, a scalp lock, and that was painted red. There'd be feathers. And here's a rubbing from some rock art that shows you the feathers hanging off a bridle. Next, let's take a look at the barding. And what I'm going to do is explain how I've come up with what I've done here. Now, if we look at the shape of this barding, this would be flexible. It would be tied on under here. It would be tied on to the main barding piece. And the main barding piece in the pictures has it right down to the feet. However, the horse has to be able to move his legs. So you can't have this coming up any higher than the top of the legs. Here you could have it a little lower, or it could be straight across. I don't know, but I've made it lower at the back, but given the horse room for movement at the front. There's also a hole in it so that the saddle can fit through. And what I would imagine is that they would have the horse tacked up with the saddle, the bridle, and then they would put the barding on top when they were ready to go into battle. That's just my guess. One of the things I noticed in these rubbings off the rock art is there seems to always be an angle on the barding. So that is why I made it long at the back. And in this one, you can see how it is longer in the back and shorter at the front. And I think they've just missed out on some of these, but I believe it probably does have a bit of an angle on it. As for how the barding is created, checking out Malcolm's YouTube channel gives me a lot of very interesting stuff, and I would highly recommend looking at this. But here we've got the rawhide scale armor, and that is what I have used for my piece. So I would assume it's some sort of scaling system stacked on top of each other. And here you can see with the testing he's done, it really does work. Really interesting video. Highly recommended. Check this out. The other thing I've noticed here is there's often decorations shown on these pictures. So I have used the standard type of horse painting, but I put it on the barding instead, so that the horse would still have the same attributes as when they paint the horses themselves. I thought that looked kind of neat, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't too bright, so I used a fairly dull paint for that. I also see some here, it looks like there may be fringes, so I've used fringes on my crupper to give that look. Again, it could be anything, but it might be fringes. When the rider gets on his horse, he often throws a pelt over top of the saddle for comfort. So I'm just going to take that off for now. And you can see the stirrup sticking through. So what I would guess is this piece would just come right off. So I'm going to leave this tied on here because what you want is a quick way out. So if I just remove the crupper, I can take the barding on over the saddle and slip it off the horse's head. Like that. And with that slipped over, and it would probably take a few people to do it, you can see the horse is still tacked up and still fully rideable, ready to go. And I think that would be very important if you want to get out of wherever you were quickly. So I think the barding is very separate than the rest of the equipment. I would also assume this piece is quite flexible based on how it's created. And again, I mean, I didn't make it with little pieces, I've just used leather tooling for that. But that would be able to fit into some sort of carry and be taken away by somebody other than the warrior themselves. Now this would be made out of rawhide, most likely, so it would be a lighter, whiter, more beige color. But I think they may have also rubbed glue and sand. They've used glue and sand for a lot of uses for armor. And this may also have some glue and sand mixed in. So I made it a little bit darker. And here you can see the paint, the various paintings, to give the horse various attributes and to also denote winds and other things. And again, I've linked all that information in the description. If you're enjoying this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps my channel. For the saddles, they had this type of style is very common, as well as a pad saddle. And I've used this style because it gives you more room, height at the back and the front, to hold a warrior into position when they are fully armed. These warriors would not be hanging off the horse if they were wearing armor and they weren't traveling at fast speeds. So I'm going to look for something that gives me some height on the cantle and pommel. So I've gone for this basic style. And for the crupper with the fringes, I've used something similar to this, just for looks and to give that fringe at the back. And that's a nice pad saddle. So looking at the actual piece, you'd have a piece of hide, maybe buffalo, that goes over top of the saddle. Then we'd have a saddle. And you can see the construction of that. There are pieces of rawhide wrapped over wood, a piece of leather of some sort for more comfort here. It would be tied on by a girth. The girth is tied on. The stirrups would be wrapped wood, most likely bent wood pieces. And the crupper is attached to the back of the saddle and then goes around the tail of the horse itself. For the protection of the horse, and again, there's going to be a lot of weight on this saddle because of all the barding on top, you'd have to have a nice piece of hide underneath so that the horse's back wouldn't rub, and you'd have a lot of support here with this piece of hide. It would make sure it wouldn't rub at the front. There's lots of room at the horse's withers right here. And the point of the crupper that goes around the horse's tail, it keeps the saddle from sliding forward. Now, with the barding on, your saddle's not going to move around too much. But as I stated, the barding is probably not worn full time. So that would be required, and it would also add some decoration. Another point I wanted to mention was the horse. A lot of natives like to ride with horses with lots of colorful spots and patterns. It is said that it helped give them protection in the battle. And the Appaloosa pattern was very popular, as was the medicine hat pinto, like this one right here. These horses wouldn't have been Appaloosas like we know them in current day. It was said that the horses in some of the writings were a lot like fine European riding horses. So they'd be lighter and they would not be Mustangs or wild horses. Finding a pattern like this would have been very hard to find, but it would have been possible, and I'm sure they probably bred for something like this as well. Just a quick history on the Appaloosa, where you can see this leopard complex gene has been around for over 25 or 27,000 years, as you can see in cave drawings, plus the DNA. And this would be the kind of horses that came from Spain, and you would have seen this before the actual Appaloosa breed was developed. Next, let's take a look at the lance and shield. First off, with the lance, that would actually be 14 feet long. And I mean, he could carry different weapons. I've chosen the lance. And as you can see here, there'd be a sharpened end on it. And it would be wrapped. There could be pieces here to help the handholds. We have some decoration feathers. And again, it would be longer, but that worked for my piece. And here in my photograph, you can see this would probably be carried in one hand, tucked underneath his arm, pointing down. Because you can see some of them straight up and down. That would catch on trees or whatever. This is the safest way, most likely, that something like a long lance would be carried, and the rest would be up back around here if it was the full 14 feet. But I think that would be the safest way of carrying it. And I mean, the doll doesn't bend like a real person, but his arm would be more bent, and that would be tucked right up underneath his underarm. And here is a very similar lance, and this is what I based my piece on. Now the shield would most likely be made of a couple layers of leather, but it would have to be strong enough for protection, but light enough to be able to carry. And I've got, again, dull paint, because paint was made of natural plants, etc., so it wouldn't be bright most of the time. There's feathers, a little bit of fringe, a little bit of decoration. And on the back, there'd be a handle for carrying, like this, plus another one for actually fighting for use. And they probably wouldn't look like this, but for my doll, that's how I set it up. So this would be looped over his arm when he rides so that he doesn't have to hold on to the shield. You could just tuck that. It would be pretty heavy after a while. You'd probably tuck that over your elbow and have the reins in your hand. I would imagine every warrior has a different style of painting his own shields, and each painting and mark would have significance for that specific warrior. And this is what I've used for inspiration. Now I want to take a look at the warrior himself and how he is dressed. For the bottoms, he would have a set of leggings and a loincloth on, and that would be hooked on using a belt. So the leggings just come up the leg, and the loincloth covers up the important parts. And for his shirt, I am thinking he may be wearing a war shirt or something similar. And that would have some decorations on it. I have fringes on that. And that would be underneath. And we're talking layers because this man is armed. He wants to protect himself. Next, I put a breastplate on him because the bone pipes weren't used back then, as far as I know, from what I can research. So his shirt would be underneath. Then he'd just have this piece of armor on top. And I used something very similar to what the horse himself was wearing. These are the leggings that inspired my piece. This is the war shirt that inspired my piece. I really love the way this thing is set up. And I imagine this is more for not for the actual battle, but I could just picture something like this being used, and on top of that, more armor. In this image here, you can see that this gentleman has a shirt, most likely over top of another layer, maybe a vest, but under here, he has a piece of armor on, and that is where I got my inspiration. Then on top of that, I have a vest, and this could either be done up or not. I left it open. I have some pictograms on that, decorated, and the front is armed underneath, but on the back, the vest would be used as armor itself, and it has a panel made of sand and glue. In this case, literally, I put sand and glue on there, and that would protect his back from arrows. In this beautiful historic painting, you can see the pictograms here, and that depicts his war deeds, as it says here, and only distinguished warriors were allowed to wear such a garment. Another of Malcolm's wonderful videos shows you the sand-reinforced armor, and he actually has put this to a test. Another great video to watch. On his head, he would most likely wear something such as a piece of buffalo hide with the horns. I have feathers, and I have some hair coming out of that. I have 3 braids. Again, each warrior would be very individual, and he would do his setup as what he would want. This outfit would not be a uniform. It would be very specific to the warrior himself. And the thing around his neck, they could be wearing something, but honestly, that is just there to cover up his very ugly neck joint of the doll. And here are some nice examples of war bonnets. And this is basically what I used as a concept behind mine. Now these hair pieces could be off his own hair, it could be off somebody he loves, it could be off his horse, or there could be scalps involved in that. And he's also wearing a pair of pinched moccasins. Now it is possible that some of this, including his leggings, could have layers, and between those layers would be glue and sand to protect his legs as well. And the same on his arms. But I'm not sure, that is just a guess. But here he is basically fully armored front and back, and he has leather protection, and he is ready to go into battle. For the face painting, every warrior again was very individual, but black was used for war, and Comanches often also used red. And I've seen a lot of different versions of the black and red. This is just my version. So that is my artist rendition of what the Comanche barding might have looked like. Again, I am really open to any comments, suggestions. I would love to see what other people think. So thanks for joining me. And here's some other videos you might be interested in.